We're recording this Zoom meeting. This is 9 o'clock on November 25th. Today, we're going to be talking about pragmatic pain neuroscience using a case study from this past week in my clinic. I will pull this little sticky note off of here for the moment. That's there so that we can be HIPAA compliant in a little bit when we look at some of those items. How's your Thanksgiving, folks? Those of you in the States, Thanksgiving Day was just, 2 days ago. And Black Friday was yesterday, technically down here in the US. Many of you that are watching this may also know that the lifetime membership is available for NeuroCentric approach, and it is open until noon Pacific today. So you got 3 more hours to pay one time and get access for the rest of your life to all of the material, all of the online material at NeuroCentric Approach Online Academy. That currently is about 35 hours of online continuing education. It is PACE accredited for those of you chiros in the US, that, and I believe Nova Scotia in Canada, which accepts PACE accredited CE. That means that you can get continuing education for those. If you are a lifetime member as well, you'll get $100 off of future NCA in-person courses. And we look forward to getting those out. So the past week, things in my life. Day after Thanksgiving for my wife and I is always the day that we put up our Christmas tree. So my wife is cute as all get out this time of year. She turns into a little girl about her Christmas excitement and such. And we love getting our tree up, trimming the tree. For Thanksgiving, I made up a roast duck and a chicken, since it was just 2 of us. So we had leftovers from that with some chanterelle gravy from mushrooms that we foraged earlier in the year, and some cauliflower mashers, cause keto, y'all, and some collards from the garden, which were incredible. I grew some of those tree collards, which are really, as I understand it, you guys can correct me if necessary, but as I understand it, those are sort of a hybrid between collards and kale. When we were hiking the Camino this past early summer in Spain, every garden had these behemoth kale / collard plants growing in the garden along with potatoes. But man, it was good. It was some of the best collards I've ever had. Just did a little bacon from Laurelhurst Market in there, and just an onion, and called it good. It was some of the best collards I've ever had. And just a simple baking and sweet potatoes. It's good. One of my buddies I talked about last week too, Kevin Smith, and he and his business partner Taylor Thompson run an incredibly solid construction company here in Portland. I've known Kevin since he was a high school freshman. Kevin brought me a bottle of natural wine. It was white wine, or even more specifically, an orange wine. They leave the skins in contact with wine and for a bit of time, and so the wine shows up a little bit on the cloudy side and is a little bit orange in color. So that's kind of that was kind of good. And let's see, what else have we got? Later on this afternoon, I'm going to be putting up the decorations outside of the house. And we will, maybe I'll show some video or something of what that ultimately comes out to look like in the not too distant future. Welcoming in folks over here on the Zoom. Good morning, Dr. Heller. It is fine to see you, sir. Let's see, what am I drinking today? I do a version. I don't want too much caffeine later in the day. I will do a orange spice tea, which I like to make up something that resembles an orange sickle. You guys remember those orange creamsicles when we were kids? I used to love those push-up pops. And I make some orange spice tea and mix in a nice keto profile, high fat concoction that's got some coconut cream in there. And I usually put vanilla. And today I used some of Dr. Anthony Gustin's perfect ketone esters in here. That's vanilla flavored. Man, this is good. This stuff is tasty. And I can feel myself getting smarter by the moment with all of those ketone esters rolling around in my brain. Kudos to Dr. Gustin. Anthony is a Western States grad from about 10 years ago. He was an early adopter on the keto diet thing, managed to get on the front edge of that curve and very thoughtfully just produced a ton of content about the ketogenic diet, and very early on became he indexed incredibly well for people searching for information about ketogenic diet. And Anthony is a incredibly persnickety about quality in the products that they make. And he started to produce a line of supplements and to go with that continuing education, various kinds of medium chain triglyceride, MCT powders and oils, the ketone esters that I've mentioned before, the typical things that people trying to adopt a ketogenic diet will run into, like the so-called keto flu. When you start peeing away a lot of your electrolytes early on, you start to feel kind of punky because of that. So they put together a nice electrolyte replacement item that you can have as well. So, Mark, you having some Thanksgiving leftovers there, mate?
Turkey soup.
Perfect. Well played.
Yeah. Hey, Philip, I have a question. In low back and leg stuff, for number one, I really hope you're going to announce someday or another in-person classes, because I'm looking forward to that. But for the moment, there's two long videos that seem to focus on the low back. One is for strength athletes. The other is a class that I took a long time ago, clinical companion to fix your own back. Has the clinical companion to fix your own back been updated, or is it the same thing I took 3-4 years ago before the pandemic?
It was updated as of when I put it out, which was during the pandemic. That was something that I was trying to do, like many of us, as a pivot during the pandemic, and I couldn't teach the in-person classes. So I went ahead and loaded that up as an online presentation. Admittedly, in the intervening, what would that have been, 2 or 3 years between when you took it in person with me, I think in Seattle, wasn't it? And the online course for the clinical companion of Fix Your Own Back, I don't think there's probably that you're going to note that there is a whole lot that's different. Now, the Fix Your Own Back course for strength athletes, I got to be honest, mate. I think that's some of the best work I've done. The that is the first of something that I was hoping to do when I originally launched the Fix Your Own Back program, which was to steadily over time produce a Fix Your Own Back course, if you will, for specific avatars of people that are suffering from a disc injury. So in that case, it's strength athletes that are suffering from a disc injury. I'd like to do one for other specific sports and lifestyles as well, like one for single parents, one for desk jockeys and computer users, one for maybe CrossFitters, one for Orange Theory folks, and try to, over time, just get more and more granular with that. But the Fix Your Own Back program for strength athletes is 13 hours, and it's a collaboration with me and the several of the coaches at Kabuki Strength Lab, including one of them, the head coach, Kyle Young, who is the U.S. Powerlifting Association head coach for the U.S. team. And Kyle had the misfortune of suffering from a pretty nasty lower lumbar disc herniation about, what was it now, 2 years ago, I think. We're 2 years in. And we were rehabbing Kyle effectively using the program for about 3 months. And then Kyle he was feeling it a little bit too much and got into workout a little bit too hard, too fast, and wound up with a full-on nasty extrusion with the extruded content, nuclear contents moved centrally and were up on his spinal cord. And we had to push the surgical algorithm a little faster there because we started to have some CES kind of symptoms and stuff. So Kyle and I then subsequently worked together over a period of about a year, moving him from a post-surgical status back to about 6 weeks ago. He competed again in his first powerlifting meet after having that surgery. And it was about a year out from the surgery. So that was kind of cool. So we chronicle that in the program for strength athletes. That program is available, yes, on the online program at NCA. It's also available at the Kabuki Strength educational platform, which is another stupid value. It's about $39 a month, I think, for something like 300 hours of content they put together over the years. And that's a really good resource for people that spend a fair bit of time in the gym and want to get more nuanced training tips and things of that sort there. And then, of course, you can get it over on the Fix Your Own, the NeuroCentric Approach Online Academy, which is probably a little more notable or a little more applicable for people that are more in the clinical domain. So that is, I would suggest that people that aren't familiar with any of that material the Fix Your Own Back program is like disc rehab, call it 101 and 201. And then if you actually work out in a gym, or you work with patients that do tend to work out in that way, then this is like the 401 and graduate level coursework for that population. So it will assume that you have, going into it, that you have some understanding of exercise science, and that you're familiar with terminology, growth science, and things of that sort that get commonly tossed around in a facility where people are managing a lot of weight. So yeah, I'm very pleased with that program, and it needs to get out there more, and I'm starting to produce a little more written content to try to drive some traffic over there to it, because that one's going to help a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to work out after they've had that injury. So let's get into our case for the week. Today, I think one of the cases that I have this week, and for those of you over here that are on Facebook Live, you can join us over here on my Zoom link if you'd like to answer questions. I won't be able to handle questions back and forth over there, but questions are welcome over here on the Zoom platform. This particular case is one that I will see quite honestly in a blessedly infrequently these days. And I'll use the next statements that I'm going to make as a jumping off point for some things that I've seen, unfortunately, in some of my former students and others out there that are trying to make a name for themselves online these days. And I appreciate that pressure that people have, are experiencing out there. I would like to encourage young doctors and people trying to navigate social media that, for God's sake, guys, keep your integrity. And you know who I'm speaking to. The things that we're trying to do here involve trust in the people that we treat. This is important. Don't mortgage that trust to try to get clicks in your online presence. But I've seen some people throwing shade at people like Stu McGill again. And by throwing shade, I mean, going back to the time-honored method of the myth of this, and just because this person says this, and it doesn't matter in this case that this person they're referring to has 300 or more peer-reviewed articles with their name on it. No, they've done their own research, and online they are now going to be the expert for the next few minutes while they've got your attention and your clicks. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Stu McGill, because this patient comes in to me with, I'll just read their presentation. Their primary area of complaint is low back / flexion intolerance. They say, I'm not a doctor, but it feels like L4-L5, and also some SI joint pain on the left side. And those of you that have been doing this kind of work for a minute always kind of smile when we see that. The patient has that stage of the game. When I see that, and I see the words flexion intolerance, and you guys know that Stu has taken it on the chin over the years for using that particular remark. Flexion intolerance has been mischaracterized as meaning that the lumbar spine should not flex. Stu never said that. He is commonly misinterpreted in that way. I have, by extension, been misinterpreted, I think, at times for that. So I'll say it on the record for right now. Yeah, the lumbar spine flexes. It should flex. It does flex when we do many of the activities like deadlifting and squatting that we are maybe focusing on trying not to overflex, but it's still going to flex some. It doesn't tend to manage full flexion under load very well with repeated episodes, exposure to enough frequency, enough intensity, enough load, and enough volume. That will start to exceed the mechanical properties of that tissue to maintain that load. You'll start to get injuries to show up there. There might even be room for in the well-chosen person to do some very light loaded lumbar flexion, but some of the stuff I see that's starting to show up online again will cause an uptick in my clinic of patients that are trying to help themselves, and they're starting to expose themselves to more of this kind of load. And it often doesn't end very well. So you've been warned. But that said, when I'm 20, going on close to 25 years now out from my disc herniation, and a lot of the work that I do on my own back these days to continue to manage that is now I'm a more extension intolerant kind of person. So I do a lot more unloaded ab work. Mark knows this one from a recent little one-on-one that we had together. And I do stuff that I borrow. I kind of mix in DNS elements with prog school elements, and then use things that people have had maybe some exposure to, like gymnastics. And I'll maybe do a riff that looks like log rolling for those of you that have seen that, and then move from log rolling to hollow body, and then from gymnastics, and then from hollow body maybe to plow pose from yoga. And in between there's some very nice bridge ups of a wall bug exercise that Evan Osar was very fond of back in the day. And it was another person who has taken some of the DNS material and kind of riffed on it. But yeah, I'll commonly use that. But that let's get back to our case study here. Next question on the form is, when did you first notice this problem? It says he injured his back specifically. He gives a date in 2022, and it was doing bench press. Now that immediately makes me go, it was a bench press variation, which he says required a lot of force, near max weight, accelerating fast due to band assistance near the bottom, which also made me go, because I am not unfamiliar with bench press setups, and given that right down the hallway on any given day at one of my offices at Kabuki Strength Lab, I'm likely to walk in on any one of a number of world record holders doing bench press. And I've never seen a band setup for band assistance that would meet that description. So I was curious about that. But I believe that bad form led to pretty severe energy leakage directly into the lower back. So many of you start hearing words like this, you got to wonder, well, what does this guy do? You could imagine he's a software engineer. And I love working with engineers, because if you give them a good narrative that makes sense objectively, and you give them an action plan, and by God, they will do it. They're great patients. But you do have to create a believable narrative. If you don't, they won't do it. They'll write you completely off. So he goes on to say, I believe an oblique injury prior to this this would have been about 6 months earlier, likely compromised my back's ability to support itself. And then here's the give. Stuart McGill talks about, quote, guy wires in the back, and I believe one side of my spine's radio tower was really not functioning fully when I injured my back in September. Excuse me for that interruption. But it stemmed from a lack of spinal stability going back to the oblique injury. Says he feels pain 100% of the time, which also always makes me a little bit interested, because most people with back issues, even if they've got an intense disc herniation and some kind of radicular process, when they lay down and are completely quiet, often they can find that they have some moments without pain. And provocation and palliation questions. And the radiating question. I'll just go through these. What percentage of your waking hours do you feel pain? 100%. Some descriptive terms for quality: dull and achy. So not sharp and shooting, not electrical or burning. Is there a radiating component into the arms and legs? None of these apply. What's another full-on disc herniation, maybe even with extrusion case, that can show up, and the lumbar spine, that can show up and not have any sciatica type of leg symptoms? Well, if you've got a central disc bulge, you can very often not have radicular symptoms that show up down the leg. So your slump test and your SLR would not come into the room at all. And yet, if you press on with those questions about cauda equina syndrome, you might find they've got some saddle paresthesia or some recent changes in bowel, bladder, or sexual function. So this particular patient has no radiating component. I should have mentioned at the outset age. He is, as I mentioned, a computer software engineer, and he is 38 and has at home a young one that is 18 months old. Worsening activities: flexion, which she mentioned specifically, or holding a load out where there is shear force being applied to the spine. These are his words now. For example, holding a child out in front of me. Also, prolonged sitting in a car rides, etc. That is things that make it worse. Things that make it better: movement, getting out, going for walks. I've had some luck recently doing some SI joint specific exercises. I believe my glutes, and especially my left side glutes, are very sleepy and not putting in work. I've been doing Stuart McGill's Big Three and generally trying to limit spinal flexion as much as possible in life. So again, there's a nice give. Current pain severity was 2, average pain severity of 4, with a worst of 10/10. Pain is worst in the morning and with prolonged sitting, prolonged standing, and when he's inactive. Pain is best in the evening and with exercise. Secondary areas of complaint, he notes, I believe some of the pain is also causing a general tightness, a fight or flight defensive response that in general is causing some back, rhomboid, etc. tightness, but I believe these symptoms and not the root problem are symptoms and not the root problem itself. He also notes that he's found himself in a weird anxiety depression world, as he wondered if he was going to be okay, if he was going to heal from all this, if he'd be able to pick up his child from his crib ever again. I've largely worked through that and am in a much better headspace now, but I definitely resonated with what you said on the fixyourownback.com program. Whoa, he's been on FYOB too. around the injury also having spillover to mental health, something I've never struggled with before. Okay, so now we've got to give. He notes that he's been exposed to Stu McGill's work, so I'm going to probably assume he's read The Back Mechanic. He's been exposed to my work on Fix Your Own Back. He also mentioned some others here. He's seen a primary care doctor who gave him pain meds and muscle relaxants for a few days. A month after his injury, he tried a local canned, one of those private equity physical therapy firms, had 10 sessions after the injury. They pegged it as an SI issue, and he'd been doing some of the SI injury things there, which that coupled with some of the things I mentioned before about radicular complaints, often a person with a lateral disc herniation might not have the radiculopathy as being the major portion of their presentation. And often that lateral disc herniation doesn't show up very well on a slump or on an SLR. So in those, or you might get a paradoxical effect where when they do those particular movements, as they put more neural tension on the nerve with a slump or an SLR, they might actually note that their symptoms get better when they take tension, get worse when they take tension off of that system. So if at this particular point in history, I might ask that patient if they ever felt like when their back was particularly flared up, if they were kind of crooked, if they were pitched off to the side. And if they're old enough to know what that means, I might say something like, did you walk like John Wayne used to? Hello, pilgrim, kind of slouched over to the side. And often I found that in a physical therapy environment these days, when a patient presents like that and the physical therapist is less savvy to McKenzie's work, then they will often try to play an SI joint card on that patient and start working an SI issue. And some of you that were here last week on our case conference there will note that I really would love it if our physical therapy colleagues don't run off on the same snipe hunt that many of us chiros did for SI joint dysfunction years ago. But many of the icons in physical therapy still adhere to that, folks like Shirley Sarman. So anyway, he'd had that leverage. This patient had that leveraged on his back. In general health history, he notes that he had LOC the day after herniated himself on the bench press. He passed out when he stepped out of bed the next morning. And then he almost passed out when he sat down and tried to move his bowel on the toilet. Past health history, mild seasonal allergies, some mild GI issues. Notes that he had some stomach issues, maybe after the episode, but those were gone. If those were some sort of latent cauda equina syndrome issues, they were not present any longer. No medications, takes creatine when lifting. Family health history significant for migraines. He's never had anything like that. Notes that his job is not particularly stressful as we start to move into the social health history. Biggest quote unquote stress in his life is just sitting for prolonged periods, but he does meet that out using a standing desk at home as well. Lives with his partner, Also enjoys indoor rock climbing, and it does not aggravate his back at all. And he tries to climb a couple times a week. Other interests and hobbies: powerlifting. He started powerlifting in 2020. Took a break after the injury in September of 2022. Was able to resume powerlifting, and by that we're just referring to the three big lifts: bench press, back squat, and deadlift. And he's still doing resistance training, and that effect returned to about 50% of the load that he'd been playing with starting in November of this year. It's found that if he tries to ramp back up to 1 rep max, his back starts hurting again. Let's see, less than 150 minutes of aerobic exercise. Stress is listed as mild. He's negative on a 2-question depression inventory. Sleep quality is good, but could be better. Gets 8 to 10 hours. His willful self-poisoning in terms of smoking and alcohol are low. He finally finishes. I leave a question on the end of my intake that says, what are your goals with this visit? Are there bucket list items influenced by the things that by your presentation that we can help with? How can we help you be the best version of yourself? And he says, I believe I have the basics of how the back works, having spent some time watching your content with Fix Your Own Back and also reading Stu McGill's Back Mechanic. I've also read through Rebuilding Milo with Dr. Aaron Horsching from Squat University. I know my back is healing, but I also know that I can't protect it from flexion forever. And having cut back on some of the things I love, like disc golf and powerlifting, aren't long-term sustainable solutions, and I want to get back to them. However, I want to do it responsibly and not set myself back. He says, your reputation from working with Kabuki athletes and a recommendation from a local friend who used to be a Kabuki member, and your content from Fix Your Own Back has me coming to you. And he specifically says he wants to get confirmation of some of my own interpretations of my injury. He wants to gain any additional insight and things he might have missed, and to build a comeback plan to get strong again. Don't you love this? You know, when a patient is that crystal clear about what they hope the encounter to mean. He says, my goals are to do the things I love, but I want to do it in a safe way where I don't ever go back to where I was after I injured myself benching, where the next several weeks I couldn't bend down to change my child's diaper or to pick her up out of the crib. Okay, so cool. There is our patient history. That's what they provided. Let's orient this from a neurocentric approach, shall we? Let me pull up one of the programs or one of the courses that are available on the site. This is from the NeuroCentric Approach Online Theory and Basis for Application. This is like the introductory course on the Fix Your Own Back online academy. It's an hour long, as I recall. And I'm going to go over here and share screen so you guys can kind of keep track with me here. So this will help provide a bit of insight on how I organize my thinking processes when I start working with a patient that has a presentation like this. Find the detail I'm looking for here. I think we could probably start right here with this slide. Remember that part of what we do with this program is to try to organize our thinking process and keep ourselves organized so we don't get in the weeds with a case like this. So as I take a history, I'm thinking about the brain-based aspects and the cellular level aspects of what contributors might be playing into this patient presentation. So let's review that, and we'll start with the cellular level stuff since they're blessedly smaller. This is a person who is doing a good job to try to help themselves. They don't have a lot of willful self-poison. So remember our 4 buckets for leaning into cellular levels of stuff that will tend to sensitize neurology. There's diet, there's lifestyle, there's stress, and there's sleep. He's already noted that his sleep is good. He's getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep. His stress is well managed and relatively low. His willful self-poisoning is low. His lifestyle, I'd love to see a little more aerobic activity, but he's got less than 150 minutes going. But, you know, he does want to do disc golf a couple times a week and climb a couple times a week. And both of those things can be managed to take a heart rate up to get into zone 2 for a good bit of that time. So I'm not terribly concerned about cellular aspects with this particular individual. When we go to brain-based, though, all kinds of yellow flags are going off on this patient, though, right? We're getting lots of cues in the way that he is speaking about his fear. The cool part about that is this individual has insight. He very clearly has insight. He's learned some stuff from reading Stu's work, reading and being exposed to my work to make him wonder about how much of his current symptoms might be associated with a little bit of extra brain-based material that's going on. So that has me thinking about that. And at this particular point, as I put it at the case study, you know, as we, you know, launch this one today, I am a big advocate for pragmatic use of pain neuroscience education. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about pain neuroscience with a patient unless it is really important. Now, in this particular individual, I suspect that it is pretty darn important. And he's also shown me already that his mind is open to the possibility that that is there. So I don't have to try to change his mind too much. But I will point out that one of the very first, since he's already given me that door to walk through, one of the first things that I did to try to shift his perspective actually was all the way down here on item 4 with superficial cutaneous nerves. So many of you that have played with us enough here know that I've got a pretty standardized lower quarter examination that's going to take into consideration all of these things and go through and assess brain and cellular level in the history, and then start a movement program that evaluates the spinal cord, nerve root, and IVF, then the mixed peripheral nerves, and then the superficial cutaneous nerves, and so forth. And in the physical examination, one of the very first things that I had him do was just standard trunk, range of motion. Stand up, put your feet together, keeping your knees straight, bend down and touch your toes. And then I want to just watch and see how he tries to organize himself to do that. And he's very slow. He gives me a look when I ask him to touch his toes, like, are you sure? Is that going to hurt me? And I say, if you don't feel comfortable with it, only go as far as you feel comfortable with. And he goes down and gets his hands about 12 inches from the floor and stops and then stands back up. And I asked him if that caused some pain, and he's like, yeah, I've got a little bit of pain. Okay, where's the pain? The pain is all local in an area that he points to and says it's over my SI joint. Okay, so now I've got a belief of SI, I've got a belief of flexion intolerance, I've got a belief about a disc injury, and I've got a history that doesn't really support a disc injury. I don't generally see discs get injured primarily at the in a bench press. It's mostly an extension-based movement for people that are trying to do a powerlifting type bench press. So what I did was I pulled out one of my patients used to call it my squeezy jams. It's those silicone massage cups. And I pulled out that big one, the sucker's like as big around as my coffee cup here. And I showed it to him, told him a little bit about what it was so that you could see that it's not something exotic. And then I put that sucker literally right over the area he pointed to where it was hurting, over his SI joint, which was over the PSIS and maybe over the iliolumbar ligament there. And I put it over that and then asked him to repeat his forward bending. And he did. And as he did his forward bending that time, he had remarkably less pain. Now that's cool, isn't it? And he gave me the look, which is something I've talked about before, about ways that you can creatively lean in to pain neuroscience and expose the patient and their belief systems to a little bit of a changed perspective by doing something that they don't expect. His mind at that point, when he bends forward and goes from feeling his cardinal symptoms or his chief complaint to feeling no pain and having improved range of motion, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that's going on. So I lean right into it and I say, now, can you imagine how that cup on your back is altering your SI? No, we can't. That's obviously not changing the joint. Can you imagine how it might be changing something 4 inches deeper at the disc? No, we're struggling there as well. So what else could it be? I said, and I parked it there. And I said, let's just leave that where it is. You know, those thoughts. I took the cup off and continue our exam. So we go through our exam. I do my standing motor examination where we have the patient do repetitive heel and single leg heel and toe stands. And he's got 0 motor deficits. Cool. I do my slump test. There is no neural tension along the peripheral motor nerves or mixed nerves and the sciatic. I do my seated compression test that putatively would help to identify either an end plate fracture that was still reporting. This patient, there's been plenty of time for a fracture to heal unless there was a non-union issue. So I do the compression test, and in upright posture, no pain. In slumped posture, no pain. Slump posture there putatively would help to increase a bulging disc, and if there's a mechanical influence of compression on neurology, that might make it more notable. Or if there is an active inflammatory component, a source of nociception at an injured disc, and you put that under a little bit of stretch, that mechanical ping could cause that disc to talk and for the mind to pick that up. And I didn't get any positives on that. Straight leg raise, SLR was about 60 degrees on the on one side, about 70 degrees on the other. Is that something I'm interested in? No, it didn't reproduce any of his presenting pain. The sensitizing movements were not apparent as well. Because he believes he's got an SI issue, I do Laslett cluster. Laslett cluster is negative 5/5. There's not a single painful thing going on there in that back that I could cause with orthopedic testing targeting the disc or orthopedic testing targeting the SI joint. So then we've got orthopedic testing involving the facet joints, which we can lump in with the SI joint when we do our McKenzie screen for repetitive end range loading. We do repetitive end range loading and his back feels better. Cool. So I look at that history, and now I've got, and I did a little palpation. I do some palpation in the interspinous spaces of the lumbar spine. There's a wee bit of tenderness at L5S1. Although, mind you, this patient is, shall we say, coached well enough from his exposure to my work and Stu's, and already has admitted suspicion that the issue that's going on in his back is coming from that particular level, that he reports some tenderness right there at those interspinous spaces. So what I did then was my report of findings. For most patients that I suspect a disc injury that is ongoing and poor movement quality that is contributing and that they are ignorant of, I will go into a very different report of findings, right? In this patient, I am suspecting that what I'm observing is essentially what some researchers would call a maladaptive motor behavior. This is a patient that is avoiding lumbar flexion because they are afraid that if they do, they will re-injure their back. And based on my findings on the physical examination, they don't have an ongoing inflammatory process or nociceptive ping going on at the disc, and they don't have an ongoing neural sensitivity, either motor or sensory, in the sciatic one, I should mention, or the femoral compartment, because I did a femoral nerve tension test as well. So what this looks like to me is a patient that had possibly a disc injury, but I don't know. Based on what I'm able to learn in this, possibly a disc injury, I'll give them that. So that will reinforce the possibility in their mind that they've had that, that maybe they accurately diagnosed themselves, and that the other providers that saw them, accurately saw an active acute disc when they saw them. But I reinforce the notion in this patient that discs heal if you stop picking the scab, which, due to his fear and his coaching from McGill and maybe even from me, he's reduced his exposure to lumbar flexion. And during that period of time, he's remained somewhat active. And yet he still has pain. During that period of time, you can imagine that the disc would have had an opportunity to heal itself. And indeed, based on my findings, it looked like it had. You could also see that the peripheral neurology might be affected, that might have been affected, might have calmed down. And the mixed peripheral neurology had. But it appeared to me, based on that cup finding, that the cluneal nerves probably were involved in this. So why would the cluneal nerves become involved in a patient with this kind of presentation? My thinking is, remember that nerves, nociceptive neurons will respond to three primary stimuli: intense pressure, intense heat, or chemical changes. And one of those chemical changes could be inflammation. I'm not seeing clear signs that an ongoing inflammatory component is going on in this patient. Moreover, I'm able to affect his pain by doing something very superficially. And my understanding of the anatomy there locally would suggest that the cluneal neuralgia, either middle or superior cluneals, might be contributory here. And indeed, I can go and palpate in that area and find tenderness too that starts to mimic his presenting complaint. So when I've got palpatory findings, I've got an opening procedure that I can do locally with the cup that improves the symptoms, I'm going to lean into that as being the source of nociception that he's primarily feeling, and or the source of nociception that he's primarily feeling is possibly lactic acidosis in the large muscles of extensor muscles in the low back. Why would he be experiencing lactic acidosis in those muscles? Because he's keeping those muscles, which are type 2 skeletal muscles, poorly designed for ongoing postural support. He's keeping them tight because he's afraid, because he's essentially been coached not to. Which brings me back to McGill's coaching and the back mechanic. I spoke with Stu. We had him, we hosted him here in Portland about 2 weeks after the back mechanic was released. And Stu was candid enough in talking with me. He said, Philip, you know, that book has been on my desk for 5 years. And he said, I haven't released it because I was unwilling to do the things that my publisher said I had to make that book a sales success. He said, what my publisher wanted me to do was to make it scarier. So Stu knew that if he did that, there was going to be some fallout. But the book was more likely to be a commercial success. What I would love to see now that the book has been a commercial success is some back end stuff to maybe an updated edition that speaks to some of this kind of stuff that many of you that are clinicians and I do occasionally see of these patients that have read some of the remarks in there, like the toothpaste getting squeezed out of the tube, and will it ever go back in? Will my disc ever heal? Can I ever flex my back again? You know, is that something I should always avoid? Those are things that I think probably would be best addressed. And candidly, I think Stu knows that and would and likely will at some point address those. But in the meantime, the back mechanic is an incredible resource for most people, and most people read it and they don't have this kind of effect. But I do occasionally see it clinically. So what I did was to coach the patient that a disc is more vulnerable when we apply compression plus flexion, and that we will, in our exploration together, work on returning to his powerlifting movements, making sure that that doesn't occur. And we'll use the things that we found effective at Kabuki Strength Lab, integrating DNS principles for lumbar stabilization, vis-a-vis stacking the lumbar spine, and using intra-abdominal pressure to stabilize the spine rather than excessive erector tone, which we have identified as probably the putative mechanism for the ongoing pain from a functional perspective that this patient is having in their low back. And I licensed him to do some flexion to round his back. And we worked together. I said, I want you to put your shoes on now and let your back go. I laid him out on his back and did that flow that I talked about of laying on your back, stacking, pressurizing, doing the log rolling, then moving to hollow body, stacking, pressurizing, doing the rolling. And then we started to move into the plow pose stuff. Why do I like that? The compressive forces are lower. Yeah, you've got some because you've got bilateral psoas contraction, but to my mind, it's going to be less of a compressive mechanism than the torso's weight in a standing position. And I just started coaching him over into that. And long story, a little shorter, by the time we stood him back up and he went to touch his toes, now without a cup, he has zero pain with the previous index movement, which was standing lumbar flexion. And he's got a 50% improvement in his range of motion. His fingers are now 4 inches from the floor instead of 8 inches from the floor. So overall, I coached him that he can let his spirit go. He can start moving. I got a little funny with it. I got a little jiggy with it. We did some dance steps. I showed him how to do a merengue. I showed him how to hula hoop. I showed him how to swing his hips and get some dance moves on, that kind of stuff. So we lighten up. We said, I want you to relax more. I want you to chill out more. You don't need to be so tight. So that starts to look a little more like Peter O'Sullivan's work, and it doesn't need to throw shade at Stu McGill in the process. So there's our case study for this week. And we're 60 minutes into our gathering. How am I doing there, Dr. Heller? I'm starting to get pretty good at nailing this in 60 minutes, huh?
That was good. It reminds me of one of the things that you've said for a long time, that Stu McGill's word for it is quit crushing your back. By quit overactivating the lumbar extensors. When you do, you end up with a Mang syndrome kind of pattern with thoracolumbar restriction and irritation of superior cloneal typically. The only question on this is, I kind of differentiate the SI ligaments, which are a little more medial, from the superior cloneal, which is maybe another 1 or 2 centimeters lateral, and there's usually a specific spot. Were you putting the cup over the tender spot in the cloneal, or just generally over the SI area?
I think the best answer that I could give, given the size of the cup, is yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it would have covered both areas.
Okay,
and
great.
and I think, quite honestly, Mark, you know, and you and I will collegially, occasionally disagree over the structural issues sometimes in all of this, and I think that's absolutely fine, because at the end of the day, neither one of us knows if we're really truly right. But we've got our own clinical experiences and our own life experience that kind of frames that. My personal choice on there is that the over biomechanicalizing some of these procedures can quickly kind of we get into the weeds and a lot of dead end rabbit holes that I've found clinically over the years, because ultimately many of those things, it's difficult to, I've found anyway, I find it difficult for patients to find a place to access an agency in that. Usually that SI joint explanation at the other end of it requires a chiropractor to manipulate their joint, or a physical therapist to show them how to do some kind of exotic PRI kind of, weird things. And in that PRI world, they wind up ultimately getting their frenulum snipped or something stupid. So whatever. I now I'm throwing shade at PRI. Shame on me. But I've
I
actually
have to
seen.
I have to throw in here that for years and years and years, I had a fear of flexion, and a simple PRI exercise that encouraged sacral flexion and encouraged lowering the diaphragm, which is similar to what you're doing in DNS, like cured that in my brain. I think, allowed me to start flexing again. So I think that strategy of get the person back to be able to flex pain-free is really important in these old disc injuries. So, yep.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate you pulling me up short there. And my apologies to the PRI world and to Ron Hruska, who has contributed some wonderful things out there. But, yeah, that's good stuff. All right, so we've come to the end of another week. I will be here again next week at 9 a.m. Pacific. For those of you that are watching this before noon on Saturday, November 25th, which is 2 hours from now, the Black Friday deal for lifetime membership for the online academy for NeuroCentric approach ends at noon today. Get on that and pay one time and get currently 30 hours of continuing education. For the single lifetime price is $4.99. There's 35 hours on there right now, and you'll get $100 off if you're a lifetime member. You'll get $100 off of the upcoming in-person courses that we do. Okie doke, that's enough. I will see you guys later. Enjoy a cool, crisp fall day in the Pacific Northwest or wherever you are. Happy holidays, people. Stay curious. Go help some people.